Okay, so hello everybody. I'm talking about Ionic, and my name is Czichon. I'm software development lead at Concluro. It's a small startup near Ulm in the south of Germany, and we're focusing on web applications with a shared code base. So we have a product, it's called Ionic, and we're using Angular and Ionic for shipping our product to our customers. And Ionic is about using web technologies we already know on every platform. So maybe you've already heard this a lot of times. So cross-platform really, again, everybody has talking about cross-platform years ago, and then we have something like Xamarin for C# or something else, and now we're in the web development and we're talking about cross-platform again. And maybe you thought cross-platform was dead. So, but since 2014, Ionic developers are using the upcoming standard HTML5 and JavaScript and the new ECMAScript specifications, and so it's going to be a lot better than you maybe thought. And it's no better time than now for developing cross-platform applications using web technologies, because we're using JavaScript and HTML5 and all these cool web technologies on every platform today, for example, on mobile, on desktop PCs, and even on the server side with Node.js or something like this. And so why we don't use Ionic, for example, for developing web applications or mobile applications with a shared code base? And the reason why we could use this is because we have all this cool stuff. We have fast browsers on all devices, on desktop, on mobile. Even on the back end, we have something like Node.js, which is using the V8 engine from Google Chrome. And we have great APIs, for example, Bluetooth Web API, or the native push notifications for web, or something like this. And we have the best language. It's obviously JavaScript. And we have good frameworks like Angular, Vue.js, React, you name it. So it's really great time for being a web developer. And so what if I tell you developing mobile application is really, really easy with modern web technologies like Ionic. So it's really simple than that, because you only have to install the Ionic CLI with Yarn Global Add, for example, and or also can use npm, and then you're all set. But so what is Ionic really? It's an UI framework which is based on Angular. Currently, it's based on Angular. You can use Angular 2 or Angular 4. And it's using the native SDK under the hood, for example, with Cordova or Electron, or using the browser API. And so you only every time have these three layers of Cordova, Angular, and then Ionic. So you may think, oh, okay, this is really, really hard to set up all the things, but this is all coming with the Angular CLI. So you can install the Angular CLI and already is set, and you can start developing applications. So for example, creating a new application is really easy. So you can go Ionic start, name the mobile app you want to develop, for example, RuhrJS, and setting a default template like the tabs template or blank or something like this. Switching the directory, and then you can run Ionic serve --lab, and then magic is happening. So I want to show you a little example of this, and for this I'm going to switch. Here we go. I've already created the application because it's installing npm dependencies, and this will take a long time. So I've created a new application. It's called RuhrJS, and if I now going to run the Ionic serve command, The Angular compiler is going to run. It's using Webpack in the inside for bundling our application. And if this is finished, you can see we have an application which is running inside the browser on, here you can see both platforms, it's Android and iOS, and I also have the option to run it on, for this 1% of market share from Windows Mobile 10. So yeah, Ionic is running on Android, iOS, and Windows 10 Mobile. And the big thing about this is that you have one code base. You don't have to write your stylings for Android, for iOS, or for Windows Mobile. So you only have one styling, one component set, and you can use this component set inside your application, and you don't have to implement it for every platform. And you even can use this for the web browser, for example. If you're running this without the lab command, it's pretty much the same build process, but without the iframe handling of the platforms. And then you can see it how it works inside the web browser. So yeah, with a bit change of CSS and arranging the components, you can also use this application on the desktop platform, for example, inside the browser. And if you're adding the Electron SDK, you also can run this on the desktop platform, for example. And if we're switching back to our application, so how does this work? It's basically only Angular components, so that's why you have to be familiar with Angular 4 or Angular 2. And Ionic is based on this framework, so Ionic is pretty much only a UI framework for Angular. It's CSS and a bit of JavaScript magic. And as I told before, platform supported are iOS, Android, and Windows 10 Mobile. Also, desktop browsers, of course, are supported because it's JavaScript, you can run it everywhere. They're shipping a default service worker file with the new project, so you can run this as a progressive web application. And you can even add the Electron SDK for running it on desktop platforms like Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. And for the desktop application, this is not shipping by default, so you have to change these Cordova things, which is used for the native part. And if you're changing this with the Electron, you can leave the stack of Angular and Ionic and run this application on the desktop. So it's pretty simple. And so, do I need Angular for this? Yes, currently you need Angular for this to work. And this is because of they have a history back in 2014 where they started with Ionic 1, and Ionic 1 was also based on AngularJS, and they said in the early alpha versions of the Ionic framework that they want to support more more JavaScript frameworks, like back in 2014 it was Knockout, for example, but Knockout is not really a thing today. But they also want to support React or Vue.js, but currently they only support Angular because they've started with Angular and Ionic 1 wasn't built for other frameworks. And now the Ionic 3 is also currently only running on Angular 4. And a few weeks ago, they announced a new framework which is called Stencil.js. And Stencil.js was built from the Ionic team for their internal use for building web components. So they're switching with Ionic 4 to native web components which are also built on TypeScript and with the Stencil.js framework. So starting with Ionic 4, they're also supporting other frameworks. So you can use every framework you want to you love or you prefer to use for your application. So you also can use your Ionic components for running with React or Vue.js, or you even can run plain JavaScript applications with this and using this the components from Ionic. And the reason why you should use Ionic is it's technology we already know. So everyone is maybe a JavaScript developer or a CSS designer or something in the front-end development. And it's all native JavaScript. Yeah, they're using TypeScript, but TypeScript is only on top of the normal JavaScript. So you have to be a little bit familiar with it. You have a shared code base, so you can use your Angular components for which you maybe have developed for your web application can be used in Ionic. This is what we've done in our application. We've built a web application product, and we are now using the most of these components also in our Ionic app. And in the future, we have simple framework switching because they are switching to native web components, so you can use every framework you want. And why I personally love Ionic is because we've built our complete product on Ionic, and it's running really fast. And we are a small startup. We're only 4 developers, and if you want to support mobile applications, it's really hard to going native because you have to learn Java, you're going to have to learn Objective-C or Swift, C# for the Windows part, and if you have a web application, you also need JavaScript developers. So because we are all JavaScript developers, we can now support all platforms for this. And now I want to show you something how you can develop and how to use this framework a little bit. So I switched now to the created application, which I've shown you before. And as you can see, this is just a normal, in quote marks, a normal Angular application. You can see you have a package.json with the dependencies for Angular, of course, and Ionic. And then there are some dependencies called Ionic Native. And Ionic Native is an additional NPM packages for Ionic, because if you're using Cordova is the native SDK for the applications where you can access native APIs on your mobile device which are not providing a browsing API. For example, Touch ID or fingerprint sensor for the mobile phones on Android and iOS. And maybe you want to include these security features also in your application. And then there is a plugin for Cordova, which handles the bridging between the JavaScript and the native part. So you cannot run your Ionic application using the browser for these native parts. So we have to run the application in this container from Cordova. And there we have access to the complete native framework of our mobile platform, for example, for the iOS SDK or for the Java Android SDK. And Ionic Native is, there are few new components which are abstracting these plugins from Cordova to the Ionic and to TypeScript, so you have the TypeScript completion and IntelliSense for all these Cordova plugins. And if we're switching to our application, for example, in the main component of our application, we can see in a normal Cordova application, every time we have to, on the startup, we have to wait for this ready event, because maybe our web application, so our Ionic application, is loaded inside its web view on the mobile device before the native parts are loaded completely. So I only can access the native APIs when the platform is correctly loaded. And this is handled by this platform ready event, which is coming from Cordova. So as you can see here, we're using the default status bar plugin. It's also an Ionic native plugin, as you can see here, which provides us functionality to change, for example, the status bar of iOS and Android. I also can set here various colors, for example, by setting it per hex string or something like this. And it's supporting many APIs from the native SDKs. Some plugins are only available on iOS, some plugins only available on Android, depending on the native platform SDK. But the good thing is that Ionic and the Ionic native have created an mocking class for every of these components, so you can even test them inside your browser. And the main Ionic platform framework is now this Ionic Angular M package. So if we now want to use one of our Angular components inside our application, and for example, let's say we want to use an action sheet in our application which we created before, and this should work on every platform, for example on iOS, Android, and Windows Mobile. So we've seen our application here has 3 tabs. It's Home, About, and Contacts. So we want to add a new button to the home page, which is calling an action sheet, for example, with various actions. And to implement this, we're switching to our home page, which is currently pretty empty. It only has the constructor, some decorators for the Angular, and the imports for this. Every page in Ionic, Ionic is separated into pages. So like on the mobile, you have a new view, and Ionic is called, let's call them pages. And every page has a template, which is plain HTML with custom elements, and a CSS file which can override all the CSS from Ionic if you need this, and the main JavaScript logic or TypeScript logic. Ionic has developed their own navigation concept. So if you're familiar with Angular and the Angular router, you may think, oh, I have to use the Angular router inside a mobile application, which is not really good. No, you don't have to use this because Ionic has its own navigation controller. They have a navigation stack, which uses the push and pop navigation, so you don't have to use the Angular router for this. And we now want to add a new button, for example, to our application and calling an action sheet. And for normal, I would do something like this, call action sheet. And I hope the application is still running. Just a second. So we have added a button, and now you can see it's pretty simple HTML button with no stylings, and it doesn't look this good. So you now can style it by yourself, but me as a JavaScript developer, I'm not a designer. I'm not loving the CSS, so this is a part for the designer. Or you can use the Ionic native designs, which they bring with their components. So because it's an Angular component, you can simply add the Ionic attributes to the component, and then you can see it brings up the styling for the button. You have the styling for the material design on Android, the iOS design, and the Windows 10 mobile design. I don't know if they have some design guidelines. So, and you can use the normal Angular syntax for this, and then handle action sheet, for example, and we now have to implement this function in our page. So here we want to use this action sheet component for bringing up the action sheet and showing some buttons there. The action sheet controller can be imported using the Ionic package. You bring in the action sheet controller with dependency injection because it's related to the navigation concept, because we don't want to call the action sheet and then navigating to our page directly. It should overlays our current page. Action sheet controller. And we're now creating our action sheet, which should pop up when we click on this button. So we create a new action sheet using the action sheet controller. Create. And inside this create function, we can now handle which buttons should be shown on the action sheet and some metadata. For example, the title. You can call it settings, for example, and can give them a subtitle. For example, here you can change settings. And if I don't add any button now, we can call it, for example, just to show it to you. So we don't have to handle any routing inside our Ionic application. We just call the present function, and Ionic handle everything else for us. So if we now click on the button, you can see here on the Windows Windows 10 mobile page, you see our action sheet with no buttons for now, and also the same action sheet for Android and iOS. And you can see the CSS is breaking if you don't have any buttons. And if we now add, for example, a button, no, this. We can add here text, for example. Go to another page, and then we can add to every button an handler for the event. And for example, I'm just creating an alert, not implemented. So if you're now switching back to our application, we can see it's running the action sheet and showing us the button for every design. And as you can see, we now have implemented it's showing the alert, implemented an action sheet for the application without changing any CSS for a specific platform like Android, iOS, and for example, or Windows 10 mobile. And you can build really huge application with this. For example, if I no, that's not the correct one. If I show you the application we've developed, it's no. You can see we've developed our application for first focusing on web application. It's an Angular application which is running Ruby on Rails on backend, and we've developed our mobile application which is used by the industry company for our customers, and we're using Ionic for this. And we've developed many Angular packages which are used on the Angular web application and on our mobile application. It's Our product is an application where you can iterate processes and create custom processes. And so we have dynamically rendering these components. And if I'm now going to run this application, it's maybe taking some time. And yeah, as I told before, the Ionic team is currently switching the Ionic UI components to native web components. And yeah, I'm on the wrong branch. Starting with Ionic 4, which is releasing this year, you can use these components also in other frameworks like React.js or Vue.js. So you don't you're no longer related to any Angular framework or something like this. Okay, it's currently not running on my local machine, but yeah, I think you're getting the thing about Ionic is to help you developing fast and easy mobile applications without going to need native developers. It's also a good tool for just wireframing new applications, just to show your customers, hey, here is a prototype of the application for you. Maybe this is something you can go with. It's not a valid option if you want to develop a mobile game or something like this, because yeah, browsers are fast, but not that fast if you want to run 3D renderings on low Android devices, for example. And yeah, that's it from the Ionic thing. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me after this talk or in the lunch break. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.